He dragged himself along the soaked sidewalk, his thin arms scraped and bruised from leaning on the hard ground. His oversized t-shirt clung to his skinny frame like a second skin, and rainwater streamed through his hair like tears he refused to shed. But his eyes shone with hope. He didn't say a word. He just moved forward, as if the whole world existed in that one motion, reaching the toy store window. The glass was fogged from the inside, warmed by the air conditioning, and outside, the boy rubbed his dirty hands against it, trying to see better. Inside, a little train circled a lit-up track. Colorful robots danced alone on spinning pedestals, and a fairy-winged doll seemed to smile at him. But there was a step. Just one. But too tall for someone with no legs, too impossible for someone who only had willpower. Across the street, the man swallowed his own reflection in the dark limousine window. The driver had already opened the door, but he didn't step in. He remained still, his hand buried in the pocket of his expensive overcoat, watching. That scene was pulling something out of him, something he had locked away, suffocated, buried over time. But in that moment, it came back. Car tires splashed dirty water as they passed, but the boy didn't blink. He just tried, once, twice, 3 times. His arms searched for a grip on the wet curb. He slipped, fell, tried again, until he stopped, pressed his face against the glass like he was asking for permission to enter. Not with words, with his soul. The millionaire narrowed his eyes. His watch flashed. He was late. The meeting was important, but he didn't move. The driver cleared his throat. Still, the man stood there, soaking inside, even under the shelter of his tailored suit, because in that boy, he saw something he knew. Not in the missing legs, but in the loneliness in his eyes, in the courage to try, even knowing he wouldn't make it. And then, he heard it. One of the store attendants walked up to the door, looked at the boy, and shook his head with disdain. He muttered something to a co-worker, and they laughed. They didn't open the door, didn't help, they just laughed, and walked back inside, leaving the boy lying on the ground like part of the street's dirt. The man took a step. It wasn't a reaction. It was as if his legs moved before his brain. Then another step, and another. He left the driver talking to himself, crossed the street without an umbrella, his shoes sinking into puddles, and stopped in front of the boy. He looked down, and for the first time in years he didn't know what to say. The boy looked up, blinked, and smiled. That image wrecked him. He took a deep breath, looked at the store door, and turned the handle. But it was locked. Inside, the attendants pretended not to see him. One spoke on the phone, the other turned his back. The millionaire knocked on the glass hard, twice, then punched it. The manager appeared, looking irritated. He recognized the man's face, and his eyes went wide. He rushed to unlock the door. "Mr. M, I'm so sorry. We didn't know." "It was you." But the man didn't answer. He only looked at the boy, and then in a low voice, almost a whisper, "He's coming in with me." The manager hesitated. "Sir, unaccompanied children. There are policies." The tension sliced through the air like a blade. The boy was still on the ground, arms trembling. The millionaire knelt. For the first time in years, his knees touched the floor for someone. He picked the boy up, feeling the cold, weightless body, looked into his eyes and murmured, "We'll find what belongs to you because no one's taken everything from you. Not yet." He walked in carrying the boy. And the store, once full of lights and mechanical sounds, seemed to fall silent. But in that moment, something inside the millionaire also broke. And he had no idea how much it would change his own life. He couldn't remember the last time he held someone that gently. He cradled the boy as if any sudden move might shatter him, sat him down on one of the plush chairs in the children's reading area, and knelt to dry his face with a handkerchief, an expensive one, now soaked in rain and silence. The boy smiled. He didn't ask for anything, didn't say a word, just smiled. As if this small, intimate, impossible gesture was everything. The attendants watched from a distance, whispering, embarrassed. But he didn't care. What held him there wasn't the boy anymore. It was the past the boy had pulled out of him, because 23 years earlier, the millionaire had also been on the outside. Not in the rain, not without legs, but invisible. Smaller than his hunger, smaller than the stares of contempt, smaller than the step that had never been physical, but had always been the highest of all, the step of denied dignity. Back then, he was just Thomas. 12 years old, with a mother who worked too much, took beatings in silence and cried without sound. He'd cling to store shelves pretending to browse just to stay near the warmth, the light, the smell of new things, until a security guard grabbed him and tossed him onto the sidewalk like trash. He never forgot the sound he made when he hit the ground. It wasn't his body that hurt. It was the sound of the door closing. Since then, he swore he'd never be humiliated again. He promised himself wealth, promises, power, and he delivered. At what cost? He lost everyone around him, but he never felt weak again. Or thought he didn't until today. The boy in front of him had returned the sound of that door, and now it was opening from the inside. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer than he'd intended. The boy hesitated, then whispered, barely audible, "Milo." Thomas nodded. "Is anyone waiting for you, Milo?" The boy shook his head. No, no one was. The silence between them was warm, strange. The boy's eyes wandered over the toys with a restrained kind of hope that hurt to witness. He didn't touch anything, just looked, as if he didn't dare to belong to it. But there was something Thomas still didn't know, because at that moment, in the back of the store, one of the attendants was making a call. "Quick," whispered. "Yeah." He showed up, with some street kid. "I think it's some kind of breakdown. Yeah, better alert the board, this could get messy." Meanwhile, Thomas stood up. "Milo, what do you want most in here?" "Just one toy." The boy pointed, not at the robot, not at the train, at a simple box, an old wooden puzzle, a landscape with a house on a hilltop. Thomas frowned. "That's what you want?" Milo nodded, his voice still shaky. "It's beautiful. Looks like a place with peace." That sentence struck the millionaire like slow lightning, because the image was familiar. Very. That same puzzle, old worn, was the one his mother used to piece together in the dead of night to escape her life. The same landscape, the same silence. And then, Thomas felt something strange. A chill. The puzzle wasn't for sale. It was part of the store's decor, meant for ambiance. One of the attendants approached, curt. "Sorry, sir. That item's not for sale, it's just display." Thomas looked at him. "It's his now." "But, sir..." He pulled out his wallet, took out a black card. "Platinum. Exclusive." "Get the manager." The attendant hesitated. Left. Came back. "Manager says no, it's part of the franchise's collection." Thomas drew a deep breath. Something in him was returning. A kind of rage, not at the attendant, but at a system that says no to the ones who most need to hear yes. And that rage wasn't corporate, it was personal. Milo looked at the puzzle like it was the last good thing in the world. And Thomas, standing beside him, no longer saw a store, he saw himself. At 12, waiting for someone to say, "You deserve this." But no one did. Not yet. The manager returned to the store with 2 discreet security guards by his side. They wore regular clothes, but their eyes said everything. Thomas knew their kind. He'd hired dozens like them. They weren't just security, they were silencers. Men hired to protect systems, not people. The manager approached with an overly polite smile. "Mr. M, I understand your intention, but the puzzle the boy wants is not for sale. It's part of the decor used across all our stores. Corporate policy, I'm sorry." Milo looked down. He was already pulling away, as if he'd learned early on not to expect too much, not to wish out loud, to give up quickly before it hurt. Thomas felt the blood rise in his veins. "Corporate policy?" he repeated slowly. The manager nodded, uneasy. "We can send a similar model. We carry other puzzles from the same line." "It's not the same." Thomas's voice came out dry, cold. "It's the closest we can." But in that moment, Thomas did something he hadn't done in years. He laughed, quietly, a short, humorless laugh. Then, staring straight at the manager, "You're denying an old used decorative puzzle To a boy with no legs who spent hours in the rain just trying to see your window? The manager didn't answer. The guards glanced at each other. What exactly are you protecting? Silence. The store's image? The manager stepped forward. Mr. M, we don't want to cause a scene, but perhaps you'd prefer to speak with our reps another time. The store is busy. There are other children. The sentence hung in the air. Thomas looked around. Yes, there were other children, some with wealthy parents, some laughing, but none on the floor, with scraped arms, none invisible. Milo was already trying to slip away quietly, pushing himself with his arms, as if his mere presence was a mistake that needed to be corrected before someone yelled. Thomas knelt down, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Wait, not yet. But there was something he didn't know. Outside the store, two figures approached, a man and a woman, well-groomed, clipboards in hand. They were from the corporate board. Someone had called them. Inside, the manager got a message on his phone. He read it, went pale, and tried to hide it. Thomas stood up. You know what your problem is? The manager didn't respond. You think it's all about image. I used to think that too. I made a fortune selling people what they wanted to look like, not what they really were. But there comes a point where image doesn't hold anything up anymore, not people, not a soul. The manager cleared his throat. I understand, sir, but I'll need you to leave the store with the boy. We can arrange a special delivery. Another product, a courtesy. Thomas looked at Milo. The boy was still staring at the puzzle box. He doesn't want a courtesy. Sir, he wants that one. One of the guards stepped a bit too close, and at that moment Thomas made a decision unthinkable for a man like him. He walked over to the display, grabbed the puzzle box with both hands, and held it up. This one, now, has an owner. The manager stepped forward. Sir, you're committing a violation. That piece... Then sue me, Thomas said, calm but firm. The room went still. But first, look him in the eye. Tell him yourself he can't have it. No one moved. Say it. Silence. Thomas knelt again, handed the puzzle to Milo's small hands. The boy held it like it was made of glass, as if he were holding his own future. Thank you, he murmured, barely audible. And in that moment, the two board members walked through the door. Thomas didn't notice them right away, but he felt the shift in the room. He recognized the footsteps, the cold stares, the corporate whispers. One of them stepped forward. Thomas, we need to talk outside. The boy clutched the box to his chest. Thomas took a deep breath, because he knew. The obstacle wasn't just the manager, or the store, or corporate policy. It was the entire system he himself had helped build. And now, he'd have to confront it because of a boy with no legs and an old puzzle. The rain still drizzled outside as Thomas stepped out of the store holding the puzzle. The two board members waited under the awning, perfectly composed, eyes made of steel. He knew that. Look, he had used it many times. The look of someone smiling without a soul just to keep control. Thomas, the woman began in a voice too smooth to be sincere. We were concerned. We received a call. It seems there was a misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, he replied bluntly. A boy wanted a toy. You refused to give it to him. I gave it to him. The man beside her stepped forward. The store has protocols, Thomas. You know that. As a board member, your image represents an entire division. Thomas looked at them. Then at Milo, still clutching the puzzle under the small overhang, trying not to draw attention, like he was always apologizing just for existing. Then maybe it's time we change what that image stands for. But there was something they didn't yet know, because inside the boardroom, the rumors had already been swirling for months. Thomas was disengaged, absent, refusing events, turning down campaigns. Investors were whispering about instability. Some wanted him removed from key roles. And now with that scene, inside a flagship store holding a street kid in his arms, it was the perfect trigger. Thomas, the woman said again, exhaling. What exactly is going on? He took a long time to answer. For the first time in a long while, he didn't have all the words, just raw certainty. I saw someone no one else saw and I couldn't walk away. The man scoffed, impatient. Sounds nice, but it's dangerous. You're dismantling decades of reputation over a whim. Thomas turned to Milo. Does this look like a whim to you? Milo clutched the puzzle tighter. Didn't answer. Just lowered his gaze, a small tremor in his chin. The boardwoman stepped closer. We have a suggestion. You donate the toy personally, give a short statement about inclusion and compassion, and we end it here. No scandal, no headlines. We'll take care of it. But Thomas knew exactly what that meant. They wanted to package the moment, sanitize it, turn the gesture into a soulless PR stunt. He's not a project, and this isn't a campaign, he said. Then what is it? Thomas looked her straight in the eye. Maybe it's the only decent thing I've done in a long time. The man folded his arms. You're willing to give up everything for one boy? And then Milo spoke. I can leave, sir, if you want. His voice cut the tension like a thread of glass. Thomas turned, knelt to face him. The boy's face was calm, but there was something in it. A fear of being too much, a fear of being left behind. Milo, you're not the one who needs to leave. The boy hesitated. It's always like this. Thomas felt those words like a punch to the chest, because yes, it was always like this. The ones who had the least were the ones who disappeared, apologized, vanished, so they wouldn't be a burden. Not this time. We're going to my home. Now, with that puzzle. The board members stiffened. Thomas, I'm not asking permission. And then he walked back to the limousine. The driver was still there, surprised, but said nothing. He opened the door. Thomas helped Milo in, arranged the puzzle on the boy's lap and got in beside him. Silence. The city blurred past the windows like a muted film. Inside the car, only the engine's hum and Milo's quiet breathing. But then Thomas's phone buzzed. Notifications. News. News. Someone had filmed everything. The video was already circulating, thousands of views. Millionaire confronts employees over homeless child. The comments were divided. Some applauded. Others called him crazy. He looked at Milo. This is going to be a big problem for me. The boy bit his lip. I can give it back. No, never say that again. But in that moment, Thomas realized a toy wasn't enough. That was just the first crack in a much bigger wall. And he still had no idea what this single gesture would cost. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like the video. The news broke before Thomas could brace for impact. In less than 24 hours, major outlets were publishing headlines with slippery tones. Billionaire in emotional crisis adopts street child. Thomas M. breaks protocol, confronts his own company. The legless boy and the crumbling mogul. It wasn't about the boy, it never was, it was about him. And that ate him alive. By the next morning, his home, a secluded mansion with high walls and armored gates, was no longer a sanctuary. Cameras zoomed in from a distance, helicopters hovered, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. But Thomas didn't answer. Not the board, not old friends. Not even his lawyers. Milo was in the guest room, which was now his. He slept on a mattress far too big for his small frame, hugging the puzzle box like a stuffed animal, smiling in his sleep. That was what hurt Thomas the most. Seeing that, even surrounded by scandal, the child seemed for the first time at peace. But then the knock came. It wasn't a phone call, not an official notice. It was a visit. 2 social workers at the door, accompanied by a woman with a cold expression and a voice as soft as ice. We're here to verify the status of a minor named Milo, she said, badge visible on her grey coat. Thomas narrowed. His eyes. Who sent you? An anonymous report. Allegations of inappropriate media exposure and potential emotional manipulation by an unrelated adult. Of course, they'd set this up. They were using the very system he had helped, fortified to take the boy away from him. I'm responsible for him, Thomas said, keeping his voice steady. He's safe. Fed, watched over. You can see for yourselves. But they weren't there to check. They were there to prepare the removal. Even so, we need to take him in for a psychological evaluation. It will only be a few hours. He'll be back. Thomas turned. Milo was standing behind him, small and still, eyes wide, like he'd just relived an old nightmare. That look wasn't fear. It was recognition. like someone who knew this always happened. It was only a matter of time. "Milo, it's just for today, okay?" said the woman, smiling, and it hurt more than any threat. Thomas knelt. "Do you want to go?" The boy didn't answer, but his eyes said it all. No, he didn't want to because he knew. "I won't let them take you from me." But the social workers were already moving closer. Everything was legal. Everything was safe. Thomas felt the rage build. "You're acting under corporate influence. This is harassment." "Sir, you're interfering with a state procedure. We can involve law enforcement." Milo began to cry, quietly. That was when Thomas finally broke. The calm, the control, decades of composure, all shattered. He grabbed the boy, shielding him with his body. "He's all I have now," he said. Silence. But there was something none of them knew, because at that very moment a new viral video was making the rounds, security footage from the store. Milo trying to pull himself up to the window. No sound, no narration, just raw footage, which made it more brutal. The internet reacted. People started asking, "Who is this child? Why didn't anyone help him before? Why? Is someone only seeing him now?" But inside the house no one knew that yet. The workers took Milo, not with violence, with procedure. That hurt more, the formality. Thomas stood at the doorway, watching the official car drive away. The rain had started again, it always did. He was alone again, but this time it hurt more because for the first time he had someone to lose, and losing Milo would be like losing his last chance to be human. The house fell into silence. Not the comforting kind that comes with rest, the sharp kind that follows a loss. Thomas sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall like it might give him answers. His phone kept buzzing in a drawer, but he didn't care. Notifications meant nothing. The world outside talked too much. Inside him, everything had gone quiet. Outside, the press remained. Helicopters hovered, reporters speculated, but he didn't move. He spent hours without eating, without getting up, just breathing, if it could still be called that. On television, a panel debated his mental state. Is he having a breakdown? A PR stunt? Is it real attachment or just guilt? Every word cut like a blade. They didn't understand. They never would. And Milo? Where was he now? They said he'd been taken to a public facility. Just as a precaution, they assured. But Thomas knew what that meant. Institutional abandonment. Children lost in invisible queues, in iron-frame beds, behind exhausted eyes. How many times had he almost ended up there himself? How many boys like him had been erased, without ever having a name? But now, this boy had a name. Milo. And no one would tell him anything. He tried calling, ignored, sent lawyers. Blocked by red tape and policies, he filed for emergency guardianship. Denied. Conflict of interest and excessive media exposure. And then came the collapse. An internal document leaked, a dossier from the board. They were moving to strip him of every strategic role. Their arguments, emotional instability, unpredictable behavior, damage to brand image. He read it and felt the floor vanish beneath him. Everything he had built, every figure, every win, every gala fundraiser, now being used against him. But that wasn't what hurt most. What hurt most was the memory of Milo's voice. Quiet, hesitant, saying, "I can go, sir, if you want." He'd let them take him. He hadn't fought hard enough. Meanwhile, in the facility, Milo slept in a bunk too high for his short arms. Someone had helped him climb up. There were no toys, no silence, just kids with worn-out eyes, smaller than the fear they carried. He didn't cry, not anymore. He'd already learned. But the puzzle wasn't with him. The box had been left behind, and that absence felt like a wound that wouldn't close. But then, in the middle of the night, Thomas did something he hadn't done in decades. He prayed. Not with pretty words, not with formal faith, just whispered into the dark ceiling. "If there's still any way to make this right, anything at all, is give me a sign, just one." Silence. No light, no answer. But inside him, a memory. His mother's voice late at night putting together that old puzzle. Sometimes when we've got nowhere to lean, we make something up, a place, a story. just to remind ourselves we can keep going. And there, in that cold bed, he understood. Milo didn't need toys or luxuries, he needed a place. Their story, someone, and that someone had to be him. But there was something Thomas didn't know, because as he lay there trying to figure out his next move, a handwritten letter was crossing the city, delivered in person by a volunteer from the shelter, a woman who had seen the footage on TV and recognized the boy. The letter was from Milo. "I think I'm okay, sir. Maybe. But I don't want to get used to this place, because here, it feels like we slowly forget we exist. If you still remember me, even just a little, that's already something. I'll wait. Even if it hurts, I'll wait. I'll wait." Thomas read the letter 3 times, and he cried. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a businessman, but the raw, open sobbing of someone mourning something they never had the right to have. Because now, he knew, if he didn't act, and fast, he was going to lose him, forever. And losing Milo would be like losing the last piece of himself that still felt alive. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, Thomas was up. Hollow eyes, unshaven, but something in his posture had changed, as if he'd found a thread of purpose in the middle of the darkness. He put on a heavy coat, grabbed the envelope with Milo's letter, and walked out of the house on foot. Something he hadn't done in over 20 years. No driver, no cameras, just him, walking with his hands in his pockets, the letter folded like a map. He didn't know exactly where he was going, but his feet seemed to remember something his mind had forgotten. He ended up in an old neighborhood, aged buildings, quiet corners, bakeries still shuttered. And then he stopped in front of a peeling blue door. The doorbell echoed like something from childhood. An older woman answered, hair pulled back, tired eyes, but still soft. It took her a second to recognize him. "Thomas?" He nodded. She opened the door wider. "Come in, boy, before the world sees you like this." It was Donna Clotilde, the neighbor who had cared for him when his mother collapsed from exhaustion, the woman who taught him to read using the Bible and newspaper clippings, who used to laugh that raspy, laugh and say, "You'll be somebody one day, just don't forget to be good." He had never come back, out of shame, out of fear that she'd see what he'd become. They sat in the narrow kitchen. She poured him coffee without asking, because she knew he needed it. "I've seen your face in the news," she said. "But that's not the Thomas I know. The real Thomas, he's in that envelope right there." She pointed at Milo's letter. He handed it to her. She read it silently, then said only this: "When a child still hopes, even when they're hurt, it means they saw something good. And that something, it was you, Thomas." He lowered his head, eyes brimming. "I failed him." "No, you started something. Now you need to finish it. They won't let me." "Who is they?" she asked, gripping his hand. "Thomas, you've got the whole world in your palm. You just need to remember why you started building it in the first place." That hit deep. Because he did know he hadn't built empires out of greed. In the beginning, it was just to escape pain. Later, it became addiction. But now, maybe it could still be different. "What should I do?" Donna Clotilde looked at him the way only the elderly can, honest, unflinching. "Show the world that love isn't a liability, it's the only salvation." Meanwhile, in the shelter, Milo sat in a chair that was too tall, trying not to swing legs that weren't there. A social worker brought papers, questions, tests. He answered quietly, almost whispering, not because he was shy, but because everything there felt fragile, like a loud sound might break something. A volunteer approached. She had brightly colored hair and a light presence. She smiled with sincerity. "Do you like to draw?" Milo hesitated, then nodded. She placed a sketch pad and pencils in front of him. "Draw the most beautiful place you can imagine." He picked up a pencil slowly and began. Slow strokes, crooked lines, but clear. A house on top of a hill, open windows, a man at the door, and a child holding a puzzle in his lap. The volunteer watched, moved. "Who's that?" "That's where I want to go back to." She swallowed hard, and without another word, took a photo of the drawing. She knew it needed to get to someone. That same night, Thomas returned to his old home. For the first time he stepped into his mother's old bedroom. Everything was covered in sheets. He cleared the dust, and there, on the dresser, the original puzzle, the one aged, incomplete, but the same image. He picked it up with both hands and cried, but it wasn't pain anymore. It was clarity. He knew what he had to do, and for the first time in years, he believed it was still possible. The next morning, Thomas woke before sunrise. He looked around the now clean room, sunlight trickling in through the curtains, as if blessing something forgotten. The old puzzle lay on the desk, and he ran his fingers over the missing pieces like someone touching a wound that was finally healing. It wasn't about saving Milo anymore. It was about becoming someone worth being found by him. He called his legal team, didn't ask, gave orders, review the statutes, search for precedents, contact child rights advocates. Then he announced a press conference personally, no spokespeople. He would speak himself. Elsewhere in the city, Milo sat by the tiny shelter window. The sun began to warm the grey rooftops. He clutched his sketchpad to his chest, the one with the drawing. The colourful-haired volunteer had promised to show someone. He didn't know who, but there had been something in her voice that made him believe. He still believed, even without reason. Even without signs. At the press centre, the room was packed. Reporters, cameras, curious onlookers, all expecting another outburst from a billionaire unravelling. But when Thomas walked in, no suit, no makeup, no mask, silence fell. The bright flash of cameras tried to expose something that no longer existed, the Iron Man, because now he was just a man, and in his hands he held Milo's letter. "I'm not here to defend myself," he began, voice firm. "I'm here because I failed a boy who just wanted to belong, and in trying to protect him, I realized I've never truly belonged either." There were murmurs, but he kept going. "Everything I built was to prove I deserved to exist, money, companies, headlines. But that boy, Milo, he showed me what dignity really is. It's not wealth, it's being seen, being heard, being loved even when you think you don't matter." He took a breath. "I'm filing a formal petition for guardianship, and more than that, I'm donating 40% of my personal fortune to create a national fund for the direct care of physically disabled children in abandonment, focused on real homes, real connections, because no one should have to crawl through the rain just to see a store window." The journalists looked at each other. They were ready for a scandal, not a resurrection. But Thomas still didn't know everything, because at that very moment the volunteer at the shelter, heart racing, was showing Milo the press conference video. He watched in silence. When he heard his name on TV, he covered his mouth. He didn't cry, not yet, but his eyes lit up like someone who had just heard their name spoken aloud for the very first time, by someone who expected nothing in return. "He said my name," the volunteer nodded. "He did, and he's fighting for you." Milo hugged his sketchpad tighter and softly said, "Then I'll wait again." At the end of the press conference, Thomas left without taking questions. He went straight home, and that same day he began to dismantle. Literally, he sold cars, cancelled appearances, resigned from titles he no longer needed. Each thing he let go of, it was like shedding old skin, letting something new emerge, but he still didn't have Milo. The court's decision wouldn't come quickly, but he wouldn't wait passively. The next night, he hosted a private event, not for celebrities, but for jurists, advocates, caregivers, and be quietly of a few lawmakers. He presented the initiative, shared the numbers, but what convinced them wasn't the data, it was the story. The rain-soaked video, Milo's drawing, and the look in Thomas's eyes when, at the end, he said, "I don't want applause. I want a world where no one has to crawl just to be seen." Days passed, the media shifted, the people began to support. A judge discreetly had sent a notice. The guardianship request would receive priority review, but Thomas knew, until the ruling came, everything could still change. Even so, something inside him had already changed forever. The courtroom didn't look like the kind of place where lives are changed. It was cold, with beige walls and hard benches. But that morning, under grey skies, everything felt suspended. Thomas sat at the front beside his lawyers. No suit. Just the same jacket he wore the day he met Milo, and in his pockets, the letter and the drawing. The judge was quiet, measured in his gestures. The prosecutor seemed more concerned with maintaining order than understanding the soul of the matter. And that already hurt, because Thomas knew, in this place the truth wasn't always enough. Then they brought Milo in. He entered in a wheelchair, pushed by the volunteer with the colourful hair, the only one still smiling in the room. He looked thinner, but his eyes, they still shone. When he saw Thomas, he smiled, small, shy, but whole. The judge cleared his throat. "Mr. M, are you aware of the implications of filing for full guardianship without a previous adoption? Record?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Why do you want custody of this minor?" The question sounded simple, but it carried centuries of social divide, bureaucracy, and doubt. Thomas took a breath. "Because no child should grow up feeling like a burden. Because he saved me, without knowing it, and now it's my turn." "And are you prepared for the legal, social, and psychological implications?" "No," he said directly. "But I'm willing." Silence, the prosecutor spoke. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. M exposed the minor to media attention, involved him in public disputes, and subjected him to unsolicited scrutiny, potentially harmful to his emotional development." Thomas spoke before his lawyer could respond. He was already exposed. By life, by the streets, by indifference. "I only tried to be the first person to actually see him as human." The prosecutor frowned. "There are concerning precedents in Mr. M's history. Family estrangement, no lasting relationships, signs of instability." And that's when Milo spoke. His voice cut through the courtroom like glass breaking. "He saw me." Everyone turned. The judge called for silence, but Milo kept going. "Everyone looks, but no one sees." "He did, and he carried me. Even though he didn't know me, no one's ever done that." The prosecutor tried to respond. "That doesn't establish a legal parental bond." Milo held up the sketchbook. "He called me by my name. I didn't even know that could hurt until he did it." The volunteer placed her hands gently on his shoulders. Thomas fought back tears. "He gave me a home, even without me asking, and he told me I wasn't a mistake." The judge asked to see the drawing. The sketchbook was passed from hand to hand until it reached him. The courtroom fell completely silent. "What does this represent?" he asked. Thomas answered. "It's the place Milo created, to exist." The judge studied it for a few seconds, then turned to the boy. "And you want to go with him?" "Go with?" Milo nodded. "Even if he messes up, because he stays." The judge called a recess to review. During the break, Thomas sat beside the boy. They were quiet, side by side. "You didn't have to say anything," Thomas whispered. "I wanted to. No one's ever asked me what I think," Thomas sighed. "I don't know what's going to happen." "I do. You do. We already found each other. No one can take that away." The judge returned. Everyone took their seats again. The room was completely still. After reviewing the arguments presented, the evidence submitted, and most importantly, the clear and conscious desire of the child, I hereby grant temporary custody of the minor Milo to Mr. Thomas M., with a re-evaluation in 6 months. A soft murmur swept through the courtroom. The volunteer cried quietly. Milo didn't understand right away, but Thomas took his hand. "You're going home," the boy smiled. "To our home." And in that moment, Thomas cried. Not from loss, but from something he had never felt before. He belonged and was loved back. The house felt different, not because of renovations. It was the same. The windows still creaked. The walls still echoed with old silence. But now there were sounds, life, and the smell of cake in the oven, even if it always burned a little. Milo sat on the living room rug, a new puzzle spread out before him. Not the old wooden one, the one still missing pieces. This one had been custom-made by Thomas, a puzzle based on Milo's drawing, a house on a hill, 2 figures in the doorway, one holding a cane, the other a sketchbook. Thomas came in from the kitchen with 2 glasses of juice and a slightly crooked attempt at sandwiches. "How's this?" he asked, trying not to sound too eager. "Better than the ones at the shelter," Milo replied without looking up. "Is that a compliment?" "It's a compliment." They laughed. A light laugh, one without fear. It had been 4 months since the court decision. The news cycle had moved on, as it always does. The headlines faded, but for them, the story was just beginning. Milo still had nightmares, sometimes woke up calling for a mother he didn't remember. Thomas listened from the doorway, never going in, always respecting the boy's space. But one night Milo whispered, "Can you just stay there for a while?" And he did, sat on the floor, back against the wall, until morning. Thomas still had doubts, moments of panic, questioned whether he was fit to be a father, to be enough, but he learned from the boy. Milo taught him with tiny gestures what books never could. Caring means staying, even when you don't know how. One afternoon they were organizing a shelf of toys, some new, some donated, when Milo asked, "Do you still have the old puzzle?" Thomas pointed toward the office. "I kept it. One day we'll finish it." "Even with the missing pieces?" Thomas thought for a moment, then answered, "We learn to see beauty in what's missing, too." Milo nodded, as if he understood. It was a Saturday when they decided to finally build the old puzzle together. They spread the pieces on the dining table. Many were worn, some warped, others truly missing, but they worked on it for hours, laughing, swapping pieces, getting it wrong. And with every piece that fit, something in them aligned too. Thomas noticed it when Milo placed a piece in the center and said, "This one's me." "Why?" "Because it's in the middle and now it has a place." Thomas swallowed hard, ran his hand over the boy's hair silently. Later that day, letters arrived from the shelter. Reports, assessments, all positive. The psychologist recommended continuing custody. The upcoming court re-evaluation now had a solid foundation. Real, bonds, verified affection. Thomas read them and exhaled in relief, but part of him already knew, even if the court said no, they could never be separated again, not by law, not by soul. That night, Milo went to bed with the window open. He asked, "To leave it that way?" Said he liked the sound of the wind. Thomas stood for a moment at the door watching. "You going to bed too?" the boy asked. "In a bit." "Thanks for staying," he murmured, voice heavy with sleep. "Thank you for letting me," Thomas replied. He closed the door gently, sat in the armchair in the living room, looked around the house in silence. Every corner now held something new. A presence, a memory, a drawing on the wall, a toy car on the floor, a small shoe on the step. This was it. It was everything. He hadn't saved the world, but he had saved one, and that world, called Milo, had saved his too. The rain began to fall outside. Soft, gentle. But this time, no one was out in it. They were both inside. And for the first time, home. Thank you for reading this far. But don't go just yet. On the screen beside you is another powerful story. Click subscribe to the channel and share. I'll be waiting for you there.